Over to you, James.
Ready to go?
Yeah.
Okay, good afternoon everybody. I'd like to acknowledge and thank the traditional owners of the land. We are going to have this meeting on today, seminar, and I pass that thanks on to Aboriginal and Torres Strait people that are attending this seminar. I'm James Mort, and my fellow director Sarah would like to welcome you to this MiHAVEN Care SDA forum. And our special guest speaker, Anneke from Disability Specialists. I hope you enjoyed today. These two have gone to an extraordinary amount of work to get this ready, and tried to make sense of a very complicated and sometimes very frustrating realm. So, girls, over to you. Well done and good luck.
Thanks, James. Okay, take two we did this morning, which was a full house again. So it's a delight to have you all here. So first off, thanks for giving us your time, because your time's valuable. This sort of forum really goes back to over a year ago, where I was randomly called by Natasha at Art Disability to attend an NDIS Disability Network forum, and they asked me to be there as the voice of construction. So a little bit about MiHAVEN. James and I have been up here for about 15 years. We're locally based here in Cairns. We are quite unusual business, where we are an RTO, a construction company, a property development company. We also now manage student accommodation. And so in that sort of conversation, they said, look, you know, NDIS is now coming to Cairns. We've got a couple of thousand people with their plans. Some of those people will be identified eventually to have SDA accommodation. Currently, apart from some old group homes or have been built in the Cairns community, there hasn't been any, you know, brand new SDA construction. Not many people knew what it was. We didn't really even know how to go the pathway to go and get those plans approved. So in that little conversation we're having like today, I was asked to put a little group together, and we sort of broke away for about 3 months and just sort of rapided away as to what the knowledge we had. And we identified one of Anneke's clients, who was the first person in Cairns to get her SDA plan approved, and that sort of started the ball rolling. I did get to a burnout stage, like most of us in this space, where I was like, oh my God, it's like learning Latin. You know, it's just complicated. The language is another spectrum. And I realised, well, thanks to COVID, I got locked down for 10 weeks, which allowed me to sit down and really think about what we were doing and how we could make it work. So it's a great joy to say today that we set a goal in that room between 5 of us that we'd try and get the first SDA house built in Cairns by October 2020. I didn't think it was actually going to be James and I to build that, but it has been. So within about 2 weeks' time, Lily Street, our first building, will be complete. So that's a really nice sort of milestone at the end. So enough about me, a little bit about both of us. So I met Anneke through this process because, as we know, the OT is a very important role to play in the SDA story. And we came together about 2 months ago, and I said, look, would you give me some of your valuable time, and could we have a conversation with a group of collective people that are really caring about this opportunity? There seems to be quite a bit of misinformation about the process. I do not pertain to be the expert in this room at all about SDA, but I've learnt a lot, and I'm here to share what I know. And when we get through the whole sort of presentation, as we did in the last session, we sort of shared some information, and we shared some ideas and some stories. So Anneke, a little bit about you.
Yeah, hi, I'm Anneke from Disability Specialists, the owner of Disability Specialists, and I've been an OT here in community for the last 15 years. Why am I here? Why is an OT here in SDA? Well, I like to combine my law and my health and my mining backgrounds all together to build disability accessible homes.
Fantastic, thank you. So the next slide's not the order that we're presenting this afternoon, but it's sort of some of the key topics that we'll be addressing. So firstly, why is SDA needed in Cairns? There's two sides to that story. You know, I'm looking at it from a building point of view. Anneke is definitely looking at it from a need point of view, a care point of view. Anneke is going to talk a lot about some of the responsibilities as an OT and what the OT does, the role of the OT in this process. Try and demyth the myth about functional assessments and what that means as far as an SDA plan. Try and break down some of the language that we banter around, being SIL, ILO and SDA, does that mean? You know, the big step is, you know, how do I access SDA? What is that process? What's the eligibility? You know, what's the NDIS looking for? And then finally, a bit more about the design, construction and you know, the sorts of things we're learning our way through with MiHAVEN Care. Anneke put this, we did 2 presentations separately, and we spent all of last Thursday night together smashing our presentations together, working out what format should we talk in today, what's the key point,
We compromised.
We compromised. So Anneke felt that it was really important to come back to the heart of what the NDIS is about. Do you want to speak just a little bit to this slide?
These are just the factors for a participant that's looking into or wanting an SDA home, and choice and control really of where they want to go. Yeah. So your building factors of what we're going to get into shortly.
Okay. So just jumping straight into the lovely abbreviations that we have to learn to use, SIL, ILO and SDA, and what do they mean? We just broke it down into its different sorts of boxes as to the options with living options. And as we know with the NDIS, there seems to be a constant change and a rollout. And so even the ILO living option, I think only really started to be rolled out June, July this year. And there's been a number of webinars that I'm sure lots of us have listened to. It is a different model completely to say what SDA is. Do you want to, Anneke, talk about at the top of the SIL?
Or you got your 4 options under ILO, but that's another talk in itself. So today we're just going to stick really to your SIL to SDA transition, yeah?
Yeah.
SILs is like your old, remember the old block funding that we used to get before NDIS come in. So there's heaps of SILs houses out there owned by numerous providers, and that funding's usually coming out of the plans, yeah?
Okay. The other one is, because often when I'm having a conversation with a support coordinator, they may say, look, the family's weighing up the option about do we do a home modification, and we go down that pathway with our support coordinator and our OT assessor and housing plan, or do we look into this other option about SDA accommodation? They are 2 very different things. The home modification really is obviously what needs to be done to modify a home to make that of purpose for someone wanting to come back to home, you know, given whatever situation they've been through, being at a acquired brain injury. But one thing to be mindful when we're sort of workshopping it last week is in Cairns, as we know, a lot of the land here is sitting in a floodplain. So the majority of houses here are high-set Queenslanders. They're not easy to modify for someone with a disability, and the cost of that modification could almost be more than what the house is actually worth to replace. And I mean, I'm not the NDIS here at the moment at all, but you know that it's all measured on value for money outcomes. So there, as Anneke was sharing with me the other day, that there's a lot of pushback often from the NDIS about the package of the home modification, because it's not just getting a ramp into the house. It will be every single door opening needs to be 980 mils wide. The bathroom needs to be remodified. The kitchen might need to be remodified. So as we know in building, it's often cheaper to build a new house than actually to go and try and modify an old house. So that's just a little bit of background on that. But also that's also coming out of their core funding in their plan. The ILO, that just touching on that really briefly, that is a completely new concept. I think it's fraught with some challenges. That's where somebody could actually get themselves registered to be almost like a home share situation, where you could actually be the host to let somebody who has NDIS in their plan come and live with you. But I could imagine there's a lot of checks and balances through that process that need to be...
And different need too, I think.
Yeah.
High complex need.
And risk.
Yeah, totally different, yeah. And that's what we need to jump to. So to go back to SDA, I felt this conversation really needs to be started at the very beginning of this session rather than at the end, because as we know, in Cairns now, I think we're up to nearly 3,000 people with an NDIS plan, whereas about 6 months ago it was 2,000. and I'm hearing that that will be up to nearly 3,500 by early next year. Now, of all those people, there's only a very small percentage, probably no more than 6% of people that would ever fall into being eligible or considered to be eligible to get SDA in their plan. So early conversations with some support coordinators, you know, we've spent a lot of time talking about someone may have the desire and the to want to live independently and to get out of home like we all wanted to do when we grew up and finished school. But that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to get the opportunity of getting SDA funding in their plan. So the key criteria, which is a number of slides here we'll talk about, is the test really is have they got extreme functional impairment and or have they very high support needs. And then there's a whole criteria in the rules and regulations with the NDIS that actually explain what that all means. And then the third test to all of that too is can the participants actually access mainstream housing with additional support. So when a support coordinator and an OT are getting together to identify, well, actually, yes, the client identifies to be in either the functional impairment or high support needs, the other test that will come back in your assessment and evidence will also be able to go out to the property market and say, well, are there mainstream housing options available? And very often they'll approach, and I know we've got a couple of OTs from Department of Housing here this afternoon, they'll approach the Department of Housing to say what is available, because the Department of Housing often do housing with disability OT in it. But as we know, there's a huge waiting list and a high demand. And the other part of the Cairns property market is just taking NDIS out of the system. We have, before COVID, we were at 1% vacancy rate just in the residential property market. So we haven't had a lot of buildings since the GFC here. We're having a little bit of a spike now with COVID, with the stimulus for first homeowners. But as far as accommodation in the inner city, it's very limited supply. And a lot of it's really inappropriate anyway. Just as I'm going back to just the design challenges in Cairns, building in a flood zone, getting your heights, your ramps, your accesses, all those issues are very challenging.
Those two criteria fall under the mid-year 2020 rules. So anyone that reads that under their pillow at night, it's a lot more interpretable than the old 2016 rules. When we got our application done, so yay for coordinators now, it's a lot easier.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what I'll share at the end of the presentation, and what we will share this presentation with you all, Summer Foundation, which many of you would know, based in Melbourne, they do have a lot of very plain speaking guidelines. They're not NDIS approved, they're just a helpful guideline to go through. So there's lots of breakdowns as to identifying what does it mean to be high physical support. So just here, Anneke, breaking down. So
who's eligible for extreme functional impairment where we are today? Say we're at Spinal Life, a lot of your spinal participants would fall under that category, because despite them having a purposed design house, all the equipment in situ, all the mods, and a carer, they still need a lot of support. So your spinal and say your double amputees would fall under that.
Yeah, and what we identify from a building point of view, especially in the housing plan, is I'd say 90% plus would, if they're in the high functional capacity, require a hoist. So the hoist is a telltale sign for us that they would fall into that high level of housing design. The other category, which is that support needs, do you want to speak a little bit to that?
I forgot the hoist. What kind of OT am I?
Yeah, the hoist is
the most important part.
Yeah, exactly. So the hoist is definitely a trigger point to identify that they would be very much in that high level, and therefore given and they would have high care. So they'd have 24/7 care, up to 2 people looking after them. At any time of the day. And then, as you say, just the person supports being the other category. So you would identify people who may have been for a long time in group housing, and so they've got so used to being in that sort of world that they have lost that sort of independence and they need to be fully supported. it identifies with some really basic tests here about getting in and out of bed, getting dressed, moving around, preparing meals, accessing the community. So if all of those things need support, it's going to identify pretty clearly that they're eligible to go into the SDA. The other part of that too is you'll have some people who are in either of those categories of need, but might be young and at home, and the house has been designed, you know, at the time where they're comfortable there. They don't want to go. So it's really identifying people who really need housing, have got nowhere else to go, and they need that housing to be built to their design purpose to support their needs. Mm-hmm. Right with that one? Yeah, so going to the second category, which I probably jumped to, which is the very high support needs, as I'm saying, a lot of those people we're identifying at the moment probably have been living at home with their parents for most of their lives. Their parents now are ageing, their circumstances change catastrophically. The parents might get early onset of dementia, need to go to aged care themselves, and it's pretty clear that their child needs to find accommodation and suitable accommodation. And as we know, until the NDIS rolled out and SDA also became a major part of that story, the only options was going into respite, aged care, and quite often back into Cairns Hospital for extensive periods of time, which is not appropriate and you know, just not the outcome any of us want to achieve with it. Anything else you want to say?
No, that's good.
Covered. Okay, so as I'm saying, there's a no-T perspective here and then there's a property perspective here. And it was really Anneke that came up with, you know, why is SDA needed in Cairns, the local home truth. So I won't steal her story on that, but I also say at the same time, we've got a limited amount of accommodation here anyway, even if you know, haven't had it designed to an SDA standard. So we have a housing shortage. At any one time, I think we're up to 2,000 people that are homeless in Cairns, and that's growing at 20%. And a lot of those people would be in need of specialist housing as well.
True. So I've called it the local home truth because I'm trying to keep it specific to us here in Cairns and the issues that we all face together as coordinators, providers, professionals, whatever discipline we come from. As an OT, working in community last 15 years, there is an accommodation crisis. It was there when I was a new grad. As I say, now I'm a vintage OT. So what I've found is that there has been no place for them to go, and I would often have to take my patients, clients, participants, whatever we like to call them under the NDIS, to accident and emergency and admit them through the hospital into the system. We know that they end up in a bed, and often we call that bed block for those of you that aren't in healthcare, which means that person is stuck in hospital with nowhere to go. And as Sarah mentioned at the last one, there's been people in there for over a year, and
up to 2 years. It costs $1,200 a day to have someone in a hospital bed, which is costing all of us. And Kelly's here, she knows.
Yeah.
So yeah, so that just identifies huge need and purpose for what we're doing.
Or rest home. I was involved in the Royal Commission and putting forward my case as I was a quality director out at a local rest home here, and the amount of young people that I saw in rest homes was appalling. So yeah, our aim is to
address all those needs.
Yeah.
And just really use the network to let people know that there are other options and opportunities as to where they can choose to live. Yeah. Do you want me the next slide?
Okay. So this is a slide. I'm talking from a health perspective here in SDA, why design, environment, equipment is vital, really. So these are some nasty injuries that are still occurring in your CILS houses. That's a shearing, we call that shearing in OT, so it's rubbing against someone's wheelchair. And the second slide is a pressure injury where someone hasn't been positioned correctly over a long period of time. So yeah, sadly these are still occurring due to an inappropriate environment. A lot of the CILS houses don't have disability bathrooms, as you know. We're trying to get wheelchairs through doors that barely fit. Yeah, so thank God MiHAVEN have come to our rescue.
Hope so. Yep, absolutely. So, but I thought it was important because when Anneke shared that slide with me, I was like, oh, it's quite confronting. But I'm the builder, I don't see that side, but the support carers do see that side. And then for a lot of people who are suffering that pain, can't even tell you about that pain unless they've been presented to a doctor or to an OT to see what's going on.
I wanted to put it forward because this is what I walk into every day, these pictures, and it's something that I hold personally in my mind professionally, whereas sometimes you guys don't get to see it, so it's just really an awareness thing of what is happening.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks. So this is also something very strongly to Anneke's heart as a true OT professional, so I'll hand that one back to you.
Okay, as a bioethics lecturer, I'm very pedantic about healthcare ethics in our community. We all work with one another, and we have a lot of new providers popping up that have never been in healthcare before, so just a little few home truths of how we are supposed to act and whatnot in the professional world. That dreaded consent form that we all pop out in our practices and what it means, what does implied consent mean, should it be written, should it be verbal, should it be in an email, all those things you need to know, or the different types of consent as a coordinator. An example was I had a coordinator come to me. It was signed by a person that had an NDIS plan that didn't have capacity, so had an intellectual disability and didn't have capacity to sign that consent form. And that coordinator said, well, that's what the NDIS does, you need to accept it. I said no, because when my auditor comes in, they're going to say, Anneke, hey, why are you taking consent from someone that doesn't even understand your service agreement? That's a big no-no. So if you have dealings with the public guardian, they're very, very big on this stuff. And so I think we should all be, you know, coming up to scratch on that one. Privacy and confidentiality, again, in our community, I see a lot of floating around with patient names and subject headings. One thing the NDIS do really well is a lot of confidential, you know, they put all the confidential tags on their emails that are going out. So put the client stuff in the body.
Yeah.
Yeah, is basically what I'm saying. Intellectual property, so your marketing, your logos, your templates.
Your plans.
Yeah, everything that belongs to you as an organisation. I was typing my functional report the other week and I noticed in the medical documentation I received, another clinician had stolen my functional stuff and put it in her report. So, you know, big no-nos, or if you leave one place, people put USBs and take it to the next. It's just not good practice.
Yep.
Well, it's not legal practice.
So I said to Anneke, what is an OT? Tell me about the world of OT and where did it start from?
I better get this right because there's two in the audience, hey? Unless they want to add. So that's what we do by definition. You'll see those 8 focus areas within our functional reports out there. But what do we do? Why are we here? That's the million-dollar question. And in order to provide you some background as to why do you see OTs in all these areas, when you go right back to the start of occupational therapy, it was a guy called, he was an architect called George Barton, and he was involved in moral treatment, which was the era that we chained people to walls that had mental health conditions, and that was their treatment. And he said, hey, if we don't chain people to walls, they might get better. So moving on from that, in the 19th century, when the OTs were rehabbing all the wounded soldiers that were coming back from war, they had nothing to do, their legs were blown off, giving them something purposeful and meaningful to do, they found, hey, people get better. Moving now into today's times, we do a lot of specialities where you'll see OTs at the hospital doing specialist rehab, lymphedema, burns, hand therapy, oncology. Then out in the community, we do a lot of mental health. So that's why in our functional reports, we not only deal with the body stuff, but we deal with the psychology and the neuroscience, mental health stuff as well. And then the difference between a physio and an OT, everyone likes to know that one. and I don't think I'll ever get this answer perfectly, but physios are brilliant people who are specifically trained in muscles. They know their muscles and they are masters of muscles, whereas we do a bit of everything. We do the muscles, the bones and the brain stuff, I guess.
Yeah. And then blend that from a building point of view ergonomically into space. So it's that sort of transitioning whatever that person's disability is or limitation is physically, and then how, you know, the thinking all the way through as to the functionality and the furniture and all the assistive technology that's going to sort of just continue to grow and get innovative to make someone's life more independent and happier. Yeah. So I just thought there's a pretty interesting background as to the OT world, because the OT, as we know, is like one of the key components to getting through this whole SDA process.
Yeah. And I guess it answers the question, you know, why you got the OT that works with kids, then they work in equipment, or people know us as the rail ladies, which is a very glamorous position, you know.
Or the
See,
stuffed
that's how
toy.
people know us, the rail ladies. So functional assessments, the coordinators in the room will know, hey, when I'm calling OTs, why does one OT do a different functional to the other? Well, it depends on our training. I'm overseas trained. We had to do a lot of neuroscience, and we weren't allowed our OT degree until we built a specialist disability house on paper and passed our exams. I understand that's not the practice everywhere, and probably why I got into this area, whereas some aren't trained in that. Also, what are you seeking your functional for? Are you looking at a review? Are you looking for an appeal? Sadly, if it gets to that stage, are you looking to transition from SILS over to SDA? And tell your OT what you're actually wanting, because I write that report specifically to the need that you're seeking. So good communication in that way is needed, because I just need a functional. Well, what for? We get that a lot on the phone. What are you seeking? What's the end goal? You're trying to get someone out of a rest home and into a beautiful SDA house? Great. Tell us that stuff.
And the more that communication's happening, there's so much time lost, as we know, in the system. And I think what I'm trying to do is, in a collaborative way in the community, is to say, if things are identified early, because as we know, there's so many people, just new people getting their SDA, their NDAS plan at the moment, and their plan might start very small. But in actual fact, once it's reviewed, it could be a hell of a lot more. And so I think it's that sharing of understanding as to when you're assessing, you're going out to the field and you're meeting new clients, and you know, you're finding out their story and how they want to live, or what their living circumstances are going to be, or what it looks like it's going to be in the next 2 years. Is there a change to the family structure where your sister might have been looking after you, but she has to move interstate for work or something? So, you know, it's having some awareness, because we'll talk about it later, but there's huge time frames in all this assessment, and we know that the system is new and it's slow and it's clumsy and it's changing and it's challenging and it's frustrating. And then that time has an impact on people's lives. And, you know, with COVID, we know people got stuck in aged care and we couldn't see them, and their health deteriorated through that period. And then it became even another 3 or 4 months lost in that process of trying to help them get their SDA plans working, because the OT couldn't get into the aged care if they didn't have a flu shot, or, you know, there's all these things that just keep adding layers and barriers and delay, basically.
True.
Yeah.
And part of being a good coordinator is planning, and ringing the OT at the last minute. Oh, why does OTs always have these wait lists? Well, I'm going to tell you why. It's standard practice. Your surgeon has a wait list. You might be on a wait list for 3 years for surgery in the public system. It's just standard clinical practice. If a referral comes in, it's got to be seen in an order. We can't allow people to jump the list unless it is for legal reasons out there. But where I'm running with that is I do get a lot of OT shopping, but I call it OT shopping because we're trying to fish around for the cheapest OT. But at the end of the day, you know what you need. You know you need a functional. Call us up and lock in that day, hey? Because by the time you ring back, that would have gone to another person, and it happens all the time. Yeah.
Yeah. And the one thing I'm learning as an outsider looking in and listening to a lot of the webinars down in Melbourne and Sydney is it's all about quality. So it's all about quality of evidence. It's creating a robust case. So, you know, use the people that we know have got a great reputation and
Use local.
use local.
Not fly. There are people that fly
we
in.
have, and to a year ago to where we are now, I mean, we've come leaps and bounds as to just the conversation and people understanding what they can access and what they need to do. Yeah. The next slide is another one of Anneke's famous slides.
This is a new SDA home that just got approved in New South Wales. It's in Corlett. Does anybody from the audience want to tell me why that's not really cool? Yeah, so, you know, you're in a wheelchair and you've got to actually access your own home round the back. Yeah, which...
Leave the stairs for the visitors and the staff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
New South Wales home, not a beautiful MiHAVEN home.
No, we were going to bring some really bad examples along, but thought that wouldn't be great for marketing.
And this is a local job here in Cairns, not going to name names, but what is going on with this one, design-wise?
Does not lead to the door.
Hey,
Exactly.
and
You've got to go multiples around, and it's a nice big grassed area there.
and that's client's family, not even clinician, so...
You've actually got to wheel your wheelchair over the grass.
Absolutely, or go the long way. Yeah, exactly. Through the grass.
Yeah, so I'm wheeling my lovely new wheelchair through the grass in monsoon weather into my beautiful home, and then I'm met by a wall with a TV that's affixed 3/4 of the way up the wall. But what if a lot of wheelchairs don't have tilt function? So they're sitting in their wheelchair having to watch their TV like this on the wall. So I was asked to come in and assess this house after it was built. So the good thing is get the OT involved while it's being built.
Yeah. So we'll talk about that. The co-design input is essential to the success of the house. Anyway, we'll talk about that in detail soon, which leads us pretty much now into the different categories of SDA, which is also the different categories of assessment through the functional assessment. So there are 4 key categories. There's actually a 5th category called basic in the system, but it's not really used. So the highest level is what we call high physical support. That's housing designed to incorporate a high level of physical access, provision for people with significant physical impairment requiring very high levels of support. What I see all the time when I'm reading an OT report and a housing plan, I'd say 90% plus of anybody that falls into that category requires the ceiling hoist or some form of hoist. So they cannot get out of their bed. Key to us on that is that the house then becomes the highest level of building classification. So it will either be classed as a 1B or a class 3 under the Building Code of Australia, which means we will be putting fire sprinklers in. So this building is fire sprinkled, but it is a commercial building. Homes aren't fire sprinkled, they just usually have a smoke alarm. But the cost of putting that in is about another $60,000 in the build for just a normal home. And then as we go, that sprinkler system has to be serviced every single year to make sure it's functioning. So there's a lot of fire checks and things like that to go into the house. The next category is fully accessible. Not much difference between fully accessible to high physical support, except I would say that someone who's fully accessible does not require a hoist to get in and out of bed or to get to the bathroom or to get into their lounge chairs. So we would still, from our point of view, we would still be making sure that they're either in a class 1B or a class 3 from a design perspective. And just because there's different categories, and most of these categories, but I'll put robust over there, you would find you could still have a blend of people living together, sharing the house. But from a design point for James and I, for MiHAVEN, is we will pretty much design most of our houses to the high physical support because we want to build a housing portfolio that's going to be robust for the future. So we'll have the maximum flexibility to manage the market demands and changes of people's circumstance. Because you might have someone who's fully accessible at this point in time at the age of 45, but their health may deteriorate so much that they will need to go into a high physical support. So that each of their rooms will be designed for the system to be put in, but we may not have to put that system in unless it's identified later with changes in their plans. Improve livability, that's housing designed to improve livability by incorporating a reasonable level of physical access and enhanced provision for people with intellectual or cognitive impairment. So in that category, we don't have to go to the high fire level because there's an assumption that they can actually get out if there was a fire situation. But we would be really mindful about, in that model, I would say we'd still really want co-design input from the support coordinators and the families to actually understand what is the issue of your disability. You know, is it a blindness or a combination of complex issues that we need to think about? How many people is a safe amount of people to live with, and also just the purpose of that design. Robust is probably one of the most challenging categories, and the last session this morning, I think we all decided at the end that we probably could do a complete forum just on robust needs. When I first started getting involved in this a year ago with my little SDA group, I've got to say nearly every meeting we had, I think half the meeting got discussed about mental health in Cairns and the desperate need that we have for housing for people with mental health issues. Robust is quite a different design as far as what we have to put into the building. Do you want to just speak a little bit about that from an OT perspective?
True. So from a building perspective as well, as an access consultant, what goes in is your really high impact wall linings. It's got to be soundproof. There's got to be an escape room, either for the support worker and a safe room for the client. But also, where was I running with laminated glass on the windows as well. So a lot of your restrictive practice people come under that, or really challenging behaviours on cognitive behavioural therapy plans. I'm getting a nod from the corner, so all good.
Yeah, and the design of the house would be quite different. And the whole, so in the high physical support, in the models with the fully accessible where they need the sill support 24/7, in our design of our houses, that component is built inside the house. So that room for the sill support 24/7 is inside the house. In the robust model, you could have a situation where you're building really individualised single bedroom units with a shared support sill provider. Mm-hmm. Anyway, that's another conversation, but it would be a different design. And we know there's a huge demand. We have not built the first robust house yet, but we are open to work in a community way to try and think as to some different modelling as to how that would look and what would be really appropriate housing to meet that need. So, the big one, how do we access SDA? Number one, it's the support coordinators that have a huge role to play in this and how they work through in identifying. So I suppose I go back to that very first start of this afternoon, which is identifying the eligibility criteria. So as I said, I've had a couple of support coordinators early in the year saying, look, so-and-so wants to move out of home. And she's 21, that's her aspiration. She's got every right to have that aspiration. But when they did an assessment with the NDIS, it came back and they said, no, her home situation is safe, her family structure is there to support her, and so it just wasn't going to get through. So I think first off, really test the water on that eligibility criteria, and the OT would be a great person to confer with because they would be able to look at a functional assessment that may have been done just to get their plan going. Do you want to talk to some of these
Investigating housing solutions. We've got 2 housing OTs here in the audience. Are there any disability houses in Cairns? Exactly. So the coordinator working hand in hand with the therapist to, you're going to talk about the housing plan? Yeah.
So on the next slide, I think one of the core things, and that's what I'm saying at the end of this, we'll give you, I won't give you handouts because I'm saving trees, but I'll give you the linkages that you can download. These are from the Summer Foundation. They're very plain English, they're easy to follow, they use excerpts out of OT reports, and I think all support coordinators who are looking after clients potentially that may fall into this category, really do yourself a favour and just read one of these reports. But some of the key things, advice from the NDIA that they're looking for in these reports is they really want facts, not emotion. It's a bit of a two-way thing. So for the support coordinator writing the housing plan, they don't want expressions like, oh, this is going to transform such and such's life. They don't want that sort of elaborate emotional statement. They want you to stick to the facts by saying something like appropriate housing would allow that person to move out of an aged care facility. Pretty simple. And the key is to present the facts as clearly as possible. So if you attend any of these SDA housing forums across Australia, they'll just keep coming back to clear, concise reports. They don't want 100-page reports written. They just, and if you go through these guidelines, there's rules, regulations. There is a lot to it. There is definitely a lot to the writing out of the plan. It's detailing the day in, day out of someone's life and what that looks like, and why whatever the situation they're in at the moment is not working for them.
True.
Agree? Yeah.
And matching it to the legislation. I think my original one was 57 pages, but I've got a lot better since then.
Yeah. Yeah.
The housing plan, is that something that you would do, or is it combined with the support coordinator?
Coordinator can.
Yeah. It's a confidence thing. It's like, you know, when you're learning something, you've never done it before, and you go, I've had a few support coordinators ring me going, Sarah, have you got any idea how much work there is in writing this plan?
Yeah.
But once you've read a couple of them, you realise, okay, it's just really getting that, you know, identifying sort of what they're looking for. It's the practical conversation, like the change of circumstance. You know, the parents have been put into aged care. The participant hasn't got any other family to live with, or even if you did, it would be a burden on them to suddenly have the change of life to be able to take that responsibility, and they can't care for their particular needs, and it needs that still support. So, yeah. You know, it just doesn't, and I think it's the most annoying thing. But these summer foundation guidelines are probably the best that I've found so far as templates. And
Everyone's got their own. It's quite.
Everyone's got their own sort of way of doing it. But one bit of advice we're hearing is obviously streamlining those reports, making them plain English, making them to the point. So the OT has done the full functional assessment, and then you've got to then carry that through into the housing plan. Don't copy and paste the whole report of the OT into the two reports, just cross-reference to it. Because you've got people on a panel trying to read these reports. If the report's really clear and it's expressing exactly what the intention of what you're trying to get for your client, you know, then you're going to have an easier situation where often the panel will come back and there'll be a 3-month delay, so you'll hear nothing. It's you guys just ringing up the whole time going, I'm chasing, you know, a status on so-and-so, and they'll say, oh yeah, that's still in the pile, or what, you know, if they get back to you. But often then it will just come back 3 months later saying, oh no, it's missing a whole lot of information. You know, so what is that information? What do they need? And then they'll say, oh, we need an update of the functional assessment. But the key I'm finding at the moment with a number of support coordinators is we've got clients who have been stuck in aged care, and we know that is, like, from a political point of view at the moment, that's absolutely, there's a high priority to get people out of aged care. And that came from the Royal Commission last year. So we've had some situations where we haven't been expecting someone's plan to be approved, or we're expecting it in 2 months, and then out of the blue, it's just come through the system and it's like, yep, it's all done. So yeah, there are circumstances like that. I think also, as Kelly would concur, clients that have been in Cairns Hospital for over a year, I'd be selling that story very strongly, because the hospital's been running at 120% capacity in beds. Therefore, if you've got people who have been in that hospital for nearly 2 years occupying beds, when you've got more people coming in and we can't do that, you know, there's a system problem. And but at the moment, there is nowhere for those people to go. So, you know, all the other respite centres are full. COVID shut down the aged care facilities. It's a no-no to go to an aged care facility anyway if you've got NDAs in your plan. So given the fact we're, you know, James and I with MiHAVEN have taken the plunge to go into this particular housing sector, we will commit to building to the demand of the market. But what we need to identify is we need at least 10 to 12 people building a case. So it doesn't matter if they haven't got their SDA plan at the moment, but it's identifying, well, if we think they've got a really good chance on it, then we can start working together as a group and support each other as to what information, what OTs we know have got capacity at the moment, to help facilitate those plans.
I think we could give you 100 right now between myself, the hospital and community housing.
Yeah, and we would, I mean, and then, you know, our challenge is, you know, someone this morning said, well, Sarah, what's the time frame, you know, from identifying to a house being built? So at the moment, we took a little bit of a leap of faith at the beginning of the year and converted one of our projects because of COVID to NDIS, but I already knew I had 2 families from last year that were ready to go. It was so important for us to actually have that relationship with the families and the OT, because we actually did a lot of co-design detailing about if they were left functioning or right functioning, You know, do they want a garden outside their room? You know, the things that were going to make their life really happy.
That there's different wheelchair sizes.
Different wheelchair sizes.
James learned
Even
about
last
that.
week we worked out that a couple of potential clients could be up to 1 metre wide wheelchairs. Actually, the code's 980 mil. So if we didn't have that conversation with the nurses and the OTs, you know, I could go straight into James' design office with the builders saying, guys, you know, how hard is it to change right now the door widths of what we've already got under production? It actually was a big problem because we'd already pre-ordered the electric doors at $10,000. We couldn't send them back to the manufacturer and saying, sorry, we need you to go this further. So we're stuck with that house now. So we'll have to think for the third house, actually, let's think about actually for a little bit more money, let's think maybe in every house we do, we might make one a little bit supersized. And that's outside of the code. No one's even having that conversation across Australia that things are changing.
True, and when you go into Sills houses now, I've actually seen people having to stop at the door, you've probably seen this too, in their wheelchair and use a walker from their wheelchair over to something because they can't fit through the door. Yeah.
Just going back to this Summer Foundation guideline, it's a bit of an oxymoron because at one point it says don't use emotive sort of language about, you know, transforming someone's life. But at the same time, they'd like to, wherever possible, use the person's own words and phrasing to bring them alive to an SDA panel. So they actually, you know, they want to hear the voice of the person who's living in the house, but they don't want the support coordinator to get really flowery going blah, 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 blah. So practical, but you can definitely have that conversation as to, you know, it will actually change my life. Yeah. Work out how to write that. Yeah, exactly. Oh, I'm going to give you the link, and I'm going to give you, we'll give you the slide set. Storm will email out to everybody, and they've got all the web links to the reports. And I've got this from just attending other webinars out of Melbourne organisations, so I just thought opportunity to keep sharing the information around.
How to write one's another.
Yeah, how to write one's another. And another little clue was if the person's reliant on informal supports, for example, living with an ageing parent, consider including a carer statement to capture the impact of providing care on a person's informal support. So as we know, a lot of the support carers have spent a long time developing that relationship with the participant, and they really know. You know, they know a lot about what's going on day in, day out of what's impacting their life and know on a personal level what will help. So just saying, make sure the support carer is all part of that conversation in the preparing the plan.
Just another question. With the ratio, I've been able to say how many approvals you've had for SDAs. Have you had many approvals?
Well, probably 5 or 6 at the moment.
What's the ratio where the panel makes a decision they can live on their own or they need to
Yeah, so good question, because we talked about that a lot this morning. And I've got to get this ratio right, because you also have a ratio of...
approximate, because I'm going through my first one at the moment.
Yeah, so as we know, it's value for money. As we know, it's an insurance scheme and there's a limit of money.
Yeah.
So as much as the big dollars are associated with a single person living in an apartment, I just don't think you're going to see a lot of that getting improved up here. So our modelling would be a 2-to-1 or a 3-to-1. I think anything bigger is too big. From a cost point of view, a 3-to-1 is probably the best value for money from a building point of view, because you've got to get the return on your investment for the cost of the land, you know, council headworks, putting driveways through. Yeah, so...
And that's coming from the top two, that's coming from the NDIA. I mean, I've been advised of that as well. It's not, it's not, you're not putting the participant up for false hope.
No, so, I mean, the ideal, if you want to push it, is you'd probably want to, is it 1 to 2? Which way did she go, Lynn, this morning? Wait. 1 to 2.
Carer first,
yeah,
then the participants.
you go the other way. So when you talk about housing, you go ratio 1 to the number. When you talk about care, you go the other way. You go the higher. So 1 to 2. So I'm not telling anyone how to do it, but I'm just saying that there's probably a slight advantage if you're going for the first time, if you can really prove that it's only ideal for that person to live with one other person with the support carer. But then if the housing option availability, it appears to only be a 1 to 3, which is what we've got in Severn Street, well, that's fine. You're not blocked from going there. You've got the choice. You can go both ways, but it has the higher level of funding to be 1 to 2. Yeah.
You need a lot of evidence as soon as you're the higher capacity you're going 1-on-1, 1-on-2.
Yeah.
You really behind you, getting that evidence, because they're not easy to get past. And then if you are past a 1 on 2 in that capacity, and you go and live in a 1 on 3, that's your 1 on 2 gone.
I
So if
don't.
you're-
Do you think
yeah,
that? Do you think that?
it's gone.
Really?
They're then stating, or actually saying that you only need 1 on 3. I've seen it happen before. So making sure that what you're going for, when you're going in, that you're actually identifying what the need is, and that's your OT. It's your OT helping you really determine that, and that's what you take. That's your still loss for care, and you take that to the.
But you are legislated for life for that approval. I mean, you've got to use it
Yeah, that's right.
to lose it. So, you know, there's somebody I heard that got approved with their SDA and then change of circumstance in the family and is not using it now and going back home. But and you can go back in for a change of circumstances, you know, but it's you've got to be on it. You've got to be pushing hard and evidence-based to show. But from a building point of view, you're going to find more product in the market being the 1 to 3 just because of the cost of building it and the land and that situation. But, you know, that's why also we're trying to have these early conversations now to educate everybody, because the more people we can work together in the community collectively, then we can purpose design. So another really important thing is, like a year ago when Anneke was writing the plan for the first client, they couldn't identify where the SDA house was going to be in Cairns because there wasn't an SDA house. There were a number of developers at the time with flash pictures saying we're coming into Cairns, we're building these amazing complexes, but they never got built. They were just promo marketing and whatever. We, being down on the ground, going, well, it's really expensive, there's lots of risks, there's so many things that go wrong during the construction phase on doing the design. Smartly went, let's work together. Like if you were my client, you said, I've got 3 children and they're teenagers, I go, fine, Kat, we're going to design your house to be like this. So that's the benefit where we really just want to work with the pipeline. So we worked, you know, and it was also the matching. So the SDA thing is you are co-collective living. It's like when we left home when we were teenagers or young adults, we found housemates. We found them either through going to college or however we found our housemates. And that has all its own issues as well. So MiHAVEN, where we're a little bit different, or a lot different to a lot of companies here locally, is we build, we design, and we also do property management. So we've got 135 bed student accommodation that we've just built in the last 3 years, and we manage all those people. We manage 7 people in every apartment every day of the week under RTA lease agreements. So our management team is people-centric as well as property-centric. And to be so we will be SDA registered when we finish the houses. We will be part of that whole journey. So apart from just designing it, we'll be managing those properties as the SDA manager, working with the SIL who will be in the house, and working with the families who are living in the houses.
So when, because I'm waiting on the OT report, so when, because there's other parties involved with this person, he's not the decision maker, his sister is, and she couldn't be here.
Yeah, that's okay.
So when do we start meeting with you?
Tomorrow.
So yeah, okay, that's
Yeah, you just ring us, because there's a lot of people sitting here. We all randomly have had conversations, and that's part of the process I really enjoy the most. I really like sitting down and thinking about, you know, what are the particular design issues that we've got to think through. And our design team's literally outside the next room that can come in and start having that conversation, or we can be looking at something, you know, and then Annike's sat with us sometimes drawing around going, hang on, what about this as an idea? Because every site's got its own constraints as to what we can work and what we can do. But also the other key is, there's 2 other major things to it. It's also the SIL. So some of you will know, so you only have 1 SIL in that house. So when you're matching the clients to live together, they've also got to come into a collaborative agreement. They agree that that's the SIL that they're happy to work with. I then have to have a collaboration agreement with that SIL, because we are the property manager and sort of also keeping another eye over the property. So there's a requirement for us to meet every quarter with the people living in the house and the SIL provider to make sure everyone is okay, which you wouldn't get in a normal property management situation. They normally just come around to see if the house is dirty or broken or whatever. So there is a much higher level of care. We have to be registered to be in that position. We have to be audited every year. The policies and procedures are like, you all have policies and procedures. As the property manager, we also have the same level of responsibility to manage. The other good thing, I think, is we are arm's length in the sense that we are not getting involved in care. We are just the builder and the property manager. So we become experts in that area. The support coordinators become experts in their field. The SILs are experts in those fields. Yeah, so...
And they're getting through a lot quicker these days. I remember when I did mine 2 years ago, it took 6 months just to get approved, whereas now the approval's done and, like you said, within the year, didn't you?
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
I mean, there's some people who would already have SDA in their plan but be in an inappropriate group home at the moment and not happy. I get those calls. And then it's like, okay, so I want to meet with the family. I want to hear that story to say in my head, okay, who else has rung me in the community in the last 3 weeks? I think we might have a match. I'm happy for those two families to catch up and get to know each other and say, do you think this is going to work? Because that's key. The matching of living together is key. You know, the disability between the different people living together is really important. You know, just working out the fit out for Lily Street between two families, well, it's limited space. We don't want 10 couches and 3 fridges and, you know, so we're trying to work out an inventory at the moment of saying, what do you want to come with? Well, we'll provide that. So we'll provide the washing machine, the dryer, we'll put in a big TV, but if you want a TV in your room, bring that, but we'll install it for you exactly where you want it. We've got requirements under the standards as to where the beds are meant to go, but if we work with the family, the daughter says, no, I want my bed up against the wall because I feel safer there. That's okay, but then James needs to know that because he'll be putting power points and switches and emergency buttons in the right location. So, you know, we're really hoping that we're designing a house for someone to stay forever. You know, and if it doesn't work out, that's okay, because we want to build a portfolio of houses where if that situation arises, well, hopefully we've got enough other SDA homes to switch around. And we won't be the only developer in town. There's definitely more people popping around at the moment, you know, getting SDA approvals. But I don't know if they're having these sorts of conversations. Yeah. Okay, so we get a lot of support from social impact investors. So we are looking at a fund of around 25 million for the next 3 years. You know, we have a purpose for why we're doing it as well. James has got 20 construction guys that are full-time employees of the company. We don't subcontract that work, we do it ourselves. So we know from a business planning point of view that we need to have about $10 million worth of construction every year in front of us. That's why I need to be working with everyone in the community saying we are so committed to doing this as our #1 prime focus, but we need to start working together on the pipeline of people that we can start building for. Yeah, so there's no limit really. And also we're not stuck to Cairns. Working with the hospital at the moment, we know there's a number of people in the tablelands, people have had farm accidents and all sorts of situations. There's no SDA housing up there. There's no choice of anywhere to go at the moment. So we would be happily to go up there and build. We know Mossman has need, we know Cassary Coast has need, Innisfail, Mission Beach, Tully. So it's really working collectively saying, okay, we've got 3 people in Innisfail, they all want to live together, fine, what's their support needs, who's the SIL, let's work through the process, let's share the conversation, help everybody through it, because we all know it's hard work, you know, just talking to some people this morning, just trying to find forms off the internet to download from the NDIS, it's like hard. No, about 200 people would be. It'd be a maximum of 2. Look, don't quote me, but if it's 6% of 3,000 people, it's around about 300 people plus. But that depends on what life cycle they're at. But that's the rule of thumb that the NDIS uses across Australia. So they say across Australia there'll be up to 28,000 people that should be identified to be eligible to live in SDA housing. But not everybody wants to go into that form of housing. But we know, especially in Cairns, there's a low socioeconomic situation here where a lot of people have got nowhere to go and they've got no family structure, no support. They're public trustees. And so they really are homeless people in a dire situation that need appropriate housing and appropriate support.
There should be like a long waiting list. There's not though, because there's 2 bottlenecks, right? There's the time it takes to obviously build the homes. There's not enough on the market available at the moment. And then also the time it takes to get the housing plans approved.
Yep. And be mindful too that we were one of the last places in Australia to roll out. So down south, it's been going for like 5 years plus. you know, 3 months ago, James and I didn't even have an SDA building certifier in Cairns that could actually certify. We were having to do the whole thing on Zoom with people in Melbourne until we could encourage a few colleagues to say, you need to get certified because this is a particular skill set we need in the community. So yeah, I think as momentum grows and more people understand where we can do it, then the demand. But so from the SDA forum that Kelly and I and Yvette and Lily Palmer have reignited, we meet about once every 4 weeks. Lily Palmer from Mercy Care is going to set up a Google Drive live registration document, which was sort of floating around through the network for just looking for SIL support. It has to be non-identified, so you don't have the participants' detailed information, but it will help to try and start working out how many people and where are they based, what location are they in, and then we can break away and have those conversations to try and network, because otherwise it's completely word of mouth of me meeting someone, Anneke doing a functional assessment, a support coordinator hearing about somebody else, and then getting on the phone and sending emails out saying, actually, I think we might have, you know, an opportunity here. Yeah. Yes.
What sort of opportunities are for participants who are needing that level of support but have family members? But like not family members that would assist with cares or things.
Wants to live with them.
Have young children that they're wanting to live with them.
Yeah.
Do they have opportunity under?
Well, they have, but it's highly complicated. So if we run an SDA model the way we're running it at the moment, we can't mix that in. So I've got a situation with a lady who's had a stroke and she's got a couple of young kids, and I know she wants them to stay with her. But if I have her living with somebody else, like you and I were sharing a house together, and then the SIL is not going to take responsibility over anyone under 18. But there was a recent change, I think about June, where like the partner could live with them, and but I don't know what that model is looking like as far as funding.
Yeah, it's a grey area.
Another question is like for the robust housing, I know a lot of participants that could not share, they were all alone. And then
Totally.
They would have 2 carers. So with SDA, is there opportunity just to be for one participant?
Yes.
Yes, there is. Yes, there is. And there's a bit of a problem at the moment in the system, because if you look at the way the thing was funded, it was actually whoever had the loudest voice down in Melbourne arguing with the panel originally about money. So robust, from an industry perspective, is probably underfunded for what it really needs to be. I'm sure that's going to get reviewed because, as you say, robust people really need to live on their own, but they need that support care. But then from a cost point of view, it's so expensive that you couldn't make the thing, because people to invest in this, because what the government's done is it's incredibly innovative what they've done. They've taken it out of like Department of Housing or the old sort of models that used to happen and said to private sector, all right, we're going to create a whole new asset class in property that investors might be prepared to back, but they'll back it if they know that there's a return on investment and it's got, you know, the banks will back it. But it's so new that even the banking system is sort of pushing back a bit on the funding side of it. So yeah, it's the cost of the build, as I said, is at least 30 to 40% more from a normal home. And then it's just trying to make it all stack up and work to be viable.
Which is great. I think it'll change a lot for you.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
because
it
like,
definitely will.
yeah, with housing, I have a few clients and with.
I think you need to put it out there. I think the NDIS needs to know that there's an interest. Unless anybody puts it out there, they don't know. So the more information that they get, the more, you know, applications, you know, talking about it.
Yeah,
it
because all
builds
we're
that
sort of
need.
doing at the moment is modifying existing properties, which is just not working.
And that might be the short-term solution that you need to do, but to look at a bigger picture down the track.
Because
Yeah.
we certainly do have people who are inappropriately in cells,
Yes, and that
who
will
are
continue.
who are falling out, and they're really stuck in terms of where we can put them behaving.
Yeah,
So
and
these
now
are
the
behavioural.
struggle is when they introduced NDIS, like before it really started up, but they were sort of like advertising, like getting the word out there and stuff. It really was portrayed that people in shared houses could choose to then leave that and have their own property tenancy
And you
for
can,
themselves.
with the right evidence and the right support behind you, depending on your need, definitely. I support a lot of people that live independently in a house with still arrangements one-on-one. might be a private rental you have to go to.
Where they're saying, well,
And that's when you talk.
And you put your house, you know, you might have to start with a private rental area, and that's where a lot of people go, and then wait for a department of housing to come up while they're waiting for an appropriate SDA to be built. So sometimes you've got to sort of look outside the square a little bit.
And talk to a specialist.
That's what we're needing from support coordinators, because we can see sometimes at that early stage and from the hospital that people are going to need that specialist, because we can see them come back in, falling out of a private rental, the lease being changed, evicted, with the damage to the house, so that robust housing in terms of your glassing, your walls, those sorts of things, because our other options prior to this was to send them to facilities down in Brisbane where they, wake up in terms of that high level behavioural, because of the restrictive practices and you can't manage in terms of any chemical restraint, and
And it's finding really good private rentals and having those really good conversations with them, that the person coming in does have high complex needs and there's a positive behaviour support plan in place and what their needs are. And yes, if there's damage, we'll be responsible, the family take that responsibility on, and just, really just try to find the right person. Can you give us a go? Just let's see how it goes, because there's a lot of hesitation put up there for people with high complex needs and positive behaviour support plans to be able to find, the right housing.
And I'd say that's the biggest gap in the market at the moment. Yeah.
These people, and asking people to give them a chance to take them on, and how we can best manage that.
If you're struggling with those options also, you can use your core funding, and hey, give us a call. I'm a disability accommodation consultant, and we can talk about those options. But today we're about...
we're trying to get to...
Back to the point.
It was just trying to demystify a lot of misunderstanding of the SDA. Like, some people ring saying, oh, so can I get the SDA funding and I'll go and build my own house and then we'll just draw down that money?
Yeah.
No, because we have to be registered. It's $10,000 a year to be registered. You've got to be audited every year. So there's a lot of, as we know, there's a lot of responsibilities in what...
There is misconceptions out there what SDA actually means.
Absolutely.
And people think just because you've got an NDIS funding and that you might have high complex needs that you're going to be eligible. Not at all. You have to meet that criteria and lots of evidence to meet it. So, and I think that's really important for people to understand.
So just sort of wrapping up a bit here. So they are the references I was talking about. That's the housing plan, participant housing statement, looking for somewhere to live. I've got to say, once you start looking in, Summer Foundation every couple of months has another sort of upload of new sort of guidelines and advice that they are sharing for free, which is a great thing. Just so MiHAVEN Care, I think we've answered most of these questions. James and I, from a business modelling plan, with our backers, are committed to this for the long term. We've spent a lot of time, probably invested nearly $250,000 in the last 12 months, just getting our designs right, getting all the SDA, getting people trained up to be certifiers. So there is a lot to, that's why initially when I got involved with ARC and the networking groups, I sort of walked away at the end of the year going, I don't know if I've got the bandwidth, like I can't touch this space. I either have to completely immerse myself into it or just say, no, it's not for me. And I think you need to understand that there'll be a lot of people out there spruiking around that they're building and developing, but I've got to say you have to really, really passionately want to be involved. It is a fantastic space to work in because I can see the improvement in people's lives. I mean, just seeing your client who's moving to Lily Street, Melissa coming on site the other day, and she said, that's going to be my bedroom, Mum, and that's going to be my kitchen, and that's where I'm going to be baking my cakes. And you couldn't take the smile off her face.
2 years. It's been a long time.
Yeah. And as we know, most of us know Lynn, she's like the biggest voice of the North of pushing and advocating for everybody, so, which is a good thing. What am I saying here? Okay, so yeah, we're upwards of a $25 million commitment for housing. We will look around the region with you collectively to work out the best solutions and location. Originally, when we were looking with the Egan's, I'd suggest certain places, even Redlynch, and at the time people would go, no, it's too far out of town, because it goes back to how much is in their plan for transportation. So, it's not just like there's a cheap block of land out there, let's just go and build a house. You know, you want to go back and say, well, are there any services there? You know, is there a shop there? Is there, you know, a swimming pool around the corner or whatever? So, I mean, the beauty of Lily Street is where across the road from Tobruk, we've got Kalana Pharmacy on the corner, open 7 days a week. There's Subway. Public transport. Close to all the services to where you go. The other location in Severn Street, also, you know, 500 metres from Cairns Central, but it's a beautiful deep block. It's backs onto a bit of a conservation corridor, and it's residential and nice neighbours, and you'll drive by and just say that they're just normal homes. It doesn't stick out to be anything different. Can you see? So property features. I think this is worth sharing as well. Like James and I have built, I don't know, over 100 houses plus up in remote regions and also in Cairns. We have a particular style. We tend to build in what we call a WeatherTex material, which looks like timber. It's a CSIRO product. The houses are very sustainable. We are putting solar power on everything. So we're thinking about, well, that's an extra cost to us, but when it comes to sharing a house, you've got to split the power bill. We live through a wet season. Everybody wants the air conditioning going. So hopefully that money saving, we've seen it in our student accommodation. Apartment with 7 people with 7 air conditioners going on solar, we've got that bill down to $250, which was originally estimated over $1,000. So, you know, we can see significant savings in doing some smart stuff with the design. There'll be security cameras, video intercom, you know, just really protecting people's privacy. We will be pet friendly, but there'll be conditions with that. So, you know, if it's a yappy dog and drives the other flatmate crazy, well, maybe that doesn't work, but a goldfish probably does, or someone wants a bird, so we're looking at a bird at the moment. But yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, it's like if you're living together, you've got to make sure that everyone sort of is compatible with those sorts of decisions. As I call it, who stole my peanut butter? That will be one thing to always think about, making sure that that's been considered. Our design, we have particularly high ceilings just because it's the way that we like to design the houses to get the cross breezes through. We use a lot of louver systems to make the houses really energy efficient. As I said, it's really important, the co-design process. So working with the families, the OTs, we can actually think about the kitchen. So, you know, the oven will open this way. There'll be a pull-out tray underneath. So if you're cooking and you're baking, you can take it down. The main dining table will be fully adjustable. The outdoor, we'll have outdoor furniture that we'll supply as well that will be fully adjustable. At this stage, we don't have the budget to make all the kitchens move up and down. You know, that would be a wonderful thing, but there is a lot of money. There's a lot of money behind the prettiness of the house that goes into the build. To get it to that fire rating, as I said, with the sprinkler systems. James has to do a lot of thinking of the wiring in. Some clients very lately just identified, oh, I've got a B-day in my plan. That's not an easy thing to retrofit. There has to be hard wire into a bathroom because of being a wet area. We need to know all those things. So we really need the OT really involved with us at the beginning to make sure there's not, might seem like a little thing, it's actually a major drama for us. True. The other thing is we can't be 1 millimetre out on anything. So suddenly if you're wrapping some sort of particular fabric over the door or whatever and we're out by 1 millimetre, we will fail as an SDA house. And we can't, for $1 million build, we can't take any mistakes or risks in that. Absolutely. So it's pretty important we get it right. This is just showing you where we are. So the first houses, which, as I said, we made a goal last year to get Lily Street going. That's number 1. So that's another category we haven't talked about. So in the SDA, apart from being defined for the disability need, there's also a housing classification. So there's apartments, villa duplexes, and houses. I think that's all there is. So Lily Street, because we could only get 1 ramp in, because it's a very tight block of land, that's actually deemed as a villa duplex. So it's lesser money for us as far as the contribution to the SDA, but it just is what fits for us. Whereas Severn Street, they're 2 freestanding houses. Yes, there is a driveway easement on the side, but it is completely separate as far as the assessment goes. So that's Lily Street. So there'll be, they are 1 to 2 both those houses. So it has 2 SDA clients with a sill in each house. And then they could be a different sill in those houses. It doesn't have to be the same sill, but you can only have one sill in the house looking after those participants. Severn Street is the 2 houses which are a 1 to 3. So we are still looking, calling expressions of interest for applicants for there. That will be finished in March, April.
Sorry, what did you say it was, Buchan?
I know, so Severn Street. Severn Street's the one out of the ground at the moment. If you drive by, all the frames are up. There's been a lot of earthworks with lovely Cairns Council engineering, modelling. Suddenly, we had to come nearly 2 metres out of the ground to be out of the flood level, although if you ask the neighbours, they say they've never seen it more than here. But anyway, that's part of the new planning codes in Cairns. So the inner city has its challenges to build in. You have a lot of sewer lines and things crossing through property, where in new subdivisions you'd never have that problem. So there's a lot of stuff that we have to be aware of when we're buying land to make sure that we can actually build what we need to build on it. Then 121 Buchan Street Bungalow, we've just purchased that. That's near Cairns Central. It's a great location, just being so close to things. It's about 1,200 square metres, a block of land. It's got an existing duplex on it. And then we're building a brand new SDA home at the back of that property. In the duplex, we're doing a full renovation to make it MTA STA, which we haven't talked about today. So MTA is your medium-term accommodation, short-term accommodation. As you know, there's a huge demand for that. I get a call nearly every Friday night from someone saying we are desperately needing emergency housing. So in people's plans, they can get up to 90 days funding for MTA, which is about $129 a night. We actually recently did take one participant into our student accommodation because we do have some with disability bathrooms, but we had a full vacancy, so it was easy. We could get the sill supports in, and it was a good trial for us to see, how that would work. So given our commitment to building a pipeline, we workshopped and thought, what, we really need to have MTA in our modelling because Kelly might be ringing me saying, Sarah, we've got to transition people out of the hospital. We're desperate for beds. The support coordinator says to me, right, I'm waiting for the OT to get the report. We know it's a 3-month process. We can put them into the MTA. They could even trial living with their potential flatmates during that period to get to know them, which would be great. And then hopefully then from there we can move them into their new home. So by having a portfolio in what we're doing would allow us to have a bit of flexibility. So if things don't work out, which sometimes, with our students, they just don't get on, that's fine. We just have to wait till there's a vacancy. And
that last property's a duplex.
So the last one is going to be 2 things. It's going to be a duplex, which will be 2-bedroom, with a carers facility there as well. And then the rear house will be just like Severn Street, so that will be a 1 to 3, high physical support.
House.
Yeah, a house. Yeah. So that's the MTA, the short-term accommodation. Hopefully, we'll have sort of finished by April, and the Buchan Street house probably by June, maybe July. I don't know at this stage. And then we'll just keep if we caught up this time next year, that hopefully there's lots more dots on the map showing, the new SDA homes, because it really is a supply-demand situation. So the more demand we have, the more supply we can go out. But, there is time frames for us that we've got to go and buy the land, secure the land, clear an old house off the land, get the planning worked out with council, there's quite a lot of work that James has to do on the SDA approval. So normally when you build a house, it's really just the building certified, there's signs off and stamps and make sure everything's engineering-wise right. There's another layer which is called the SDA Specialist Consultant. So they look at it from another perspective. There's a whole other layer of controls. There is conflict between the building code and the SDA. So we often have to go away and actually then have a powwow as to, you explain it, James, you've had a few issues there between the SDA and the building certifier where you've had to resolve things.
There's the Building Code of Australia, which inside that has standards, and the standard for access is called AS 1428.1. Some of you would be familiar with that. And that's basically the standard of how you set up for access for a disability person. So the SDA guidelines for design is another set of standards which rises above 1428. But it doesn't override the building code, but it can override the building code. So there's a bit of confusion at the moment about, for instance, in 1428 in the building code, you've got to put backrests on toilets and you've got to put the fold-down shower seat in showers. In the SDA design guide, it says do not put folding shower seats and do not put backrests on toilets. So where do I go? I've got the building surveyor coming in saying you haven't got a backrest, you haven't got a shower folding seat, so I can't give you a classification under the building code. So then I've got to go to the SDA designer and say, well, okay, you've got to give me a special performance criteria that says we don't want the folding seat, we don't want the, and that's about a 10-page report which costs a couple of $1,000, which is a nonsense because your OT and your carers will say we don't want those folding seats because all they're good for is to put shampoo on. They get in the way of the commode, they're just not needed. Likewise a backrest, they just get in the way. So I guess things like that will work out in time because I can't keep paying $2,000 to get a little report that says, by the way,
It's crazy.
you know, don't put a toilet back in.
And a lot of it's very peer opinionated as well.
Yep.
So, you know, you're just trying to find the right like-minded common sense between professionals to say, come on, like, let's go back to the people-centric sort of solution we're trying to find rather than just, it's just a requirement or whatever. So
Those AS standards are designed for public access, and essentially you're building a private home.
Correct. But I've got to have those bits in to get a compliance.
Because we fight with the
certificate.
building value.
yeah.
And we often had people who get admitted to hospital because the shower seat didn't take their weight.
Yeah.
And it was
No.
to standard, and then you've got an injury.
That's what I'm saying, like just having these conversations to say the standards actually don't make sense. I mean, if someone's wheelchair is a metre wide, that's a major issue. Like, you know, you're spending $10,000 on an electric door and they can't get through. And we're going at everything to code. But if we hadn't had that conversation last week, Kelly, and then I went to James and said, what's it going to cost to change?
Because we've had difficulties with certain sills with bariatric patients, clients. You know, people are getting bigger.
And equipment's changing.
Having to be able to sustain heavier weights.
As I said this morning, to quote Donald Rumsfeld, you know, you've got the knowns, the unknown knowns and the unknown unknowns. Well, I've got a design for the unknown unknowns. So we're putting wires in for all sorts of things that may never be used, but at least there's a wire in the wall we can try and think of things in the future. But, you know, when Sarah came to me and said, oh, can you just make the doors so there's a 1.1 opening? And I said, because everything is so, you know, you've got 500 things.
I went home early.
You can open the door and all that sort of thing, and you start opening that, which opens that, which opens that, you've got to completely redesign the house. So we're doing it for one of the houses in Severn Street, but then we worked out, well, we've got to throw all our windows,
The doors.
out, because they're all designed automatic doors and the opening's only 980. So,
Can't do it.
I'm in the process of building a glass house, so if you want to give me the doors for nothing.
Sure, we're a charity. We just love throwing things around.
Sounds like
Yeah.
you won't be throwing stones.
Uh,
There's all those sorts of
yeah.
intricacies, which is frustrating and just
Michael, wake up in case I need to. My IT support here. So our website, mihavencare.com.au. It's a new website for us. We try and keep that pretty relevant. We've actually got webcams on our construction site, so every week we upload. Once you get to lock up, you really can't see anything, but it's sort of quite fun seeing how Severn Street's been built. So especially really engaging the client. So if they know that they can see their home being built and making it, especially a lot of the clients were locked away with COVID, we couldn't talk to people. So we did a lot of Zoom, we did a lot of design meetings on Zoom, we hold up a lot of pictures together and show what we're doing. Just getting that engagement is really important. So I'm just going to show you through. I can't even see the Windows key. Where is it? Down here? Do you want to do it for me? I'm getting tired. Oh, that one there. Yeah, sorry. And then that one there. Yeah. And then oh, you think it's frozen? You think? Sorry, it's just, we've got 2 virtual walking tours through the 2 different houses just to show you. And everything we design, we'll always take it to that level of visual aid, which then helps us actually identify sometimes where things aren't actually properly placed. So while we're at that early stage, we can move things around. So which one's this one? Okay, so this is Lily Street. So this is the one on the corner of McLeod and Lily, which are the 2-bedroom with 1 support carer. As I said, this site had its own challenges because it's a very small block of land, but being on a corner site still was great. So there's a shared outdoor living courtyard. We'll be building flower boxes to a wheelchair level, so if people want to plant their vegetable garden, whatever, we'll have that purpose designed. Space is really important. You know, we really like to get an inventory of what everyone's got to what we can actually house. I'll just stop that. Is the space bar stop me? So on the right here where you see these doors, originally when we started designing, that was going to be the front door coming through, and it was a big corridor, and then we were sitting there with a couple of families going, well, you know, every single inch is so important to what we can do with the house, so maybe we'll redesign it, make the doors inside where the courtyard is, and then that gave us a spare room for a study, a bit of painting. Everybody comes with 2 wheelchairs. You know, where are we going to house all the extra equipment? So, yeah, there's lots of considerations with those sorts of things.
OT's always told off for blocking the way with all their equipment, aren't we?
So a lot of this you probably know and you can see as to where we're going here. So as you can tell with the bench in the kitchen, it's all wheelchair friendly, so you can get to the sink, you can get to the microwave, you can get to the oven. As I said, there's a drawer underneath the oven that you pull out, so and the door comes this way. So, I mean, not everybody will be able to cook, but we definitely have one participant who loves baking, and we spent a lot of time with her family about making sure the kitchen was to purpose.
Even though some people may not like cooking,
they can participate. Well, in the matching, just getting to know each other, they've been doing that on weekends together, and the other lady now is getting more confident in doing things, where before, at aged care, she wasn't even allowed to go into the kitchen.
No.
Yeah.
Sitting in there, the benches at your height, whether you're actually involved, you're still participating. That's really important.
Yeah, really important.
You make a good OT, Kat.
So the corridors are super wide. Obviously, everything's 980. Most of the bedrooms will have their own sliding door onto a little deck, just so it's a little bit of privacy, just so you can get out on your own. You don't have to, if you don't feel like talking to your flatmate, you just want to have some time out, you can go out through that way. Everyone will have their own bathroom. I've seen a few other developers down south where... Oh yeah, we had to put it in. We had to put it in, well spotted. Michael, can you get me the other one? Yeah, we can't give you the glass cap, but you can have lots of shower seats.
I'll take them. But if you give it to me, I'll make my glasses.
Yeah, exactly.
They don't even have like a lid on the toilet seat.
So this is Severn Street. We've basically sort of built this out of the ground. It's huge. So they'll come up a side driveway, plenty of parking. Living in the tropics, it's all about creating that outdoor living as well as the indoor living, making sure that you can be eating outside as often as we can. Trying to create those garden beds so they're wheelchair friendly. There'll be electric doors into the living room. This backs onto a really beautiful sort of open space corridor, so a lot of bird life, a lot of nature. So you're smack bang in the middle of the city, but you've still got a great sense of being in the tropics. Crocodiles.
Absolutely.
Pythons. Yeah, so look, the rooms are big, they've got big wardrobes. It comes down also, the OT may identify that there may be special equipment we need to put into the bedroom, but the hoist and all of that has to come in your plan. So we will design the structure for it to be attached to, but we need to be really clear that all that equipment and all that specialty stuff is all part of your plan. So I'd like to thank you all for your valuable time and sharing your time with us today. I hope it was informative. If you want to ask any questions, any more questions, happy to do so.
Yeah, I've got a question. Well, it's sort of three parts to it. Who owns the house, first of all? What's the security of tenancy for the people living there? And what sort of like dispute resolution things are in place if
Sure.
there's conflict between, you know, if it's a shared space?
Yeah, so good questions. So we will own the houses in a property fund. So we will be the manager for the properties. So it will be dealing with us. Under the NDIS, you have to get certified to be an SDA property manager, which is what we are. Under that requirement, there is a whole enormous amount of documentation about protection of the rights of the tenant. Every state's different, so Victoria's actually written its own legislation for SDA tenancy agreements. That's not in Queensland. In Queensland, we will fall under the RTA lease, so same rights as we would have if we were renting a house. Our student accommodation runs under the same system, so every single student has an RTA lease. They have all the protections under the RTA legislation requirements under leasing. But then there's more levels to that collaboration, as I said, under the SDA management. So we, as a property manager, have to actually engage with the SIL and the participants at least quarterly in a structured meeting. There has to be registers of any complaints or any issues or anything. Everything has to be recorded. You are then audited every single year as the SDA property manager over all your registrations and all your processes and procedures. Yeah, and so the lease agreement can be anything from a year to 10 years. So a lot of clients really would like to be able to say, well, I'm committing to that for good because it's my home. But for whatever, if some circumstances change, they don't want to live there anymore or they pass away, obviously there's a break clause like you have with, if you're leasing a house at the moment, and you have a 2-month period where you can give notice that you want to break. And then obviously our role then is to make sure we fill that vacancy and make sure we match that vacancy with the right housemate. So there's a lot of work behind the scenes that needs to be done.
So when somebody applies for SDA funding, is it for a period of time or?
They have it for life. So if you get SDA approved.
Sarah, could you just repeat the question just for the people online because they're not actually hearing?
Repeat this gentleman's.
Yes, it's the question.
So the question was a lot about the property management side of it. So A, who owns the property? B, what sort of protections are there for the participant as to what sort of lease agreement, what happens if there's a dispute, how do they break a lease, how long is a lease for? Was that clear, Paul? So the answer to that is we've got to be Queensland Pacific because in every state it can be quite different as far as what the legislation is. But currently in Queensland we fall under the RTA, Residential Tenancy Agreement. And so each participant will enter into a lease agreement with the property owner. It doesn't, I mean, you could find an SDA developer and it could be yourself. You could go and build it and lease it out. But in our model, we will have a property fund that will own all the houses and we'll be acting on behalf of that fund to manage the properties. As I was saying just before, we have to be registered. We have to be SDA property managed registered. So I think Access Housing is probably the only other one that got registered. About a year ago, it was very easy to get your registration. You just had to go online and fill out forms. Not like that anymore. It's been over a year for me to get RSDA management registration through the NDIS. So you have to go through complete audit checks. You have to have all your policies and procedures. Your staff have to be trained in not just property management, but people management to do with property. And then there is a whole list, which I'm happy to share, as to all the sorts of agreements that we have to have. So I have to have a collaboration agreement with SIL. So I also am a little bit of a watchguard with the SIL because I want to make sure that SIL's performing to the best standard, looking after the people in the house, because also I want the house to be well managed. I want to make sure I don't walk into the house and there's trip hazards, or it's a mess, or there's wet towels on the floor, or it's just hasn't been looked after. So there's lots of policies and procedures and checks. The lease time can be, as I said, could be a year to 10 years. I think most people's preferences will be about 5 years plus, because they're basically saying, this is my home and I want to stay here. But if they choose not to be there anymore for whatever reason, then it's no different to breaking a lease as you would have with your normal tenancy agreement in Queensland, which is a 2-month.
So they could take that SDA funding that
they can take that with them. It's with them for life. They could move to Melbourne with it. They could move to Tasmania with it. Which is a little bit one of the reasons why I think Anneke and I, and we don't know, but there does seem to be a lot of pushback on home modifications, because a home modification, really, to do it properly, if you're in that really high physical support, could be upwards of $250,000. And if you're the panel making that assessment, you'd have to ask yourself, is that mortgage free? Is that client going to stay in that house for the rest of their life, or is the family going to sell it on them, and then we've done this renovation, and then to what? So that's why I think the modification could be quite a challenging thing getting through. I think if you've had an accident and it's your home, and you can prove to the panel that it's your home, you've probably got a good chance. But you did have a client wanting to move up from Adelaide to Cairns and wanted a home modification done to the house to come to Cairns. I think there could have been a question mark of saying, well, what if you don't like Cairns?
True.
So...
and there's lots of old houses in Cairns, and they're trying to get me as the OT in a rattly old Queenslander to put in a ceiling hoist, and I think James
the house
will
will fall
know
down.
it's not gonna give.
Well, you've got to have a 400 kilogram rating on
Yeah.
Queensland.
If you look inside, when we're building, there are still beams going right around the whole corner of every bedroom. Like there'd be $10,000-$20,000 worth of steel just holding that up. So we know that we can lift someone up to 150 kilos, but a normal home could 400 kilos.
Yeah.
So a normal home could never do that. Yeah.
Individuals and organisations could theoretically buy land, get an SDA approved builder, build a house, get it approved by an SDA
Yeah.
approval person. Like if it was, say, someone that wanted to build a home for their family members who were qualified for SDA, what is that?
They could take the risk of building the house, and it costs a lot more to build. Okay, so you're probably talking double the money, up to $1 million to build the house, but then they couldn't manage it unless they went and got themselves to be registered to manage. But you wouldn't do it, because you wouldn't want to go and spend $10,000 to get yourself registered to look after one house.
And that's exactly why I deregistered from my audit in December, because it was going to cost just yeah.
There's only you and another.
Oh, look, there's people, if you go onto the Housing Hub, like there's websites you can go to where all over Australia people register that they're in SDA, that they're building SDA. Like it's really growing as an asset class. We would be probably the most advanced local organisation in Cairns. That is where we are on this journey, but we've invested an enormous amount of time to get to where we are. And I mean, there's nothing stopping a developer going off and saying, I'm going to go and employ an architect that knows how to design an SDA home and go and spec an SDA home and then put it out to the market on the Housing Hub and say, here it is, but they'd still have to go and find an SDA property manager to manage it for them. And that's not to say that can't be done either. So it's a free market. There's nothing stopping anyone from doing it, but there's a lot of barriers in that system that you need. That's why I was saying, initially last year when Art asked me to come and have the conversation, by the end of the year I went, oh, this is really hard. I mean, if I thought student accommodation was hard, this is taking it to another level.
And guess who used to take all those phone calls? I did.
Yeah.
A lot of free
Whereas,
love.
COVID's enabled us to have the headspace to say, well, actually, we're a company that cares about what we do. We love design. We love doing things which are different. So maybe that's, we have the skill set to do it. We're very lucky because we've got an architect who's young that we've trained up right from the beginning. So we've got that intelligence in our business. I think it's a really expensive process when you've got to keep outsourcing to consultants. But that's, how most developers would do. They'd go out and find specialists to go and design it. And and build it. So, yeah.
And a lot of the developers out there, I'm finding they're just wanting to have their contract straight up when the process doesn't work like that, as these guys
And if you
are
take
finding
that
out.
risk, you'll find you'll have a lot of vacancy.
Yeah.
And then, the thing's then not successful. And then you've got people living on their own, not sharing and not being properly managed. So, yeah.
Happy to chat
Yes,
about it.
hello.
Two questions I just thought of. So then the participant is renting from you guys, and they'll be paying rent.
So their rental contribution, like from their pension, comes out, yep, and that goes to the house, and then their SDA fund goes directly to the owner. Because, as I'm saying, this is a very innovative approach by the federal government to have rolled this sort of asset class out for housing, because there's a huge expense. You're talking about houses that don't really have an alternate use. So there's a risk of saying, oh, what happens when the money runs out and the government wants to disband the NDIS or whatever, God forbid, but, if it did, what do we do with this asset class? How do we get a return on our investment? So that's why it's so important to understand that once you get your SDA, that is for you for life, and I don't think there's any way you could break that down. What was your next one?
That's why the eligibility is so
Yeah, that's why the eligibility is so tough. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and the other part of that too is, from a property point of view, to be a responsible property owner, you have to have a sinking fund. So in collecting that rent, it might look like, oh God, this is a huge bucket of money, but it's cost about $1 million to $1.5 million to build a house, which would normally be $300,000. And then you've got to make sure, like with the fire systems, there's a $10,000 upgrade every year just to keep that compliant. And then a house of the tropics, as we know, it's a constant maintenance. So you've got to make sure that everything's maintained, that there's no slippage on the concrete pathways, just everything else that goes into it.
Is rent under SDA predetermined on your income? Your SDA, which is not your rent, but the SDA contribution is determined on what level of physical disability you have. So if you're high physical support, that's the highest level. Don't quote me, but say it's $35,000 or $40,000 a year. Then there's a location factor. So Cairns has a 1.2 location factor. So it's slightly a little bit more, because it's obviously recognising that you're outside the mainstream of the cities. And then if you put the sprinkler systems in, there's a slightly more leverage on the contribution for that. And then you have your rental contribution, which is your disability pension. So that's your rent. So you do pay that rent, and then you have shared costs. So if you and I are living together, we've still got to split the power bill, and that's why we've gone and spent an extra, say, $10,000 or $20,000 putting solar in there, because actually we're going to save you money on the way through, because by putting solar in, your power bill is going to come down. And I've heard some really nutty things about how they split bills, but they're the things that we're going to try to be very smart about doing that up front, where we will probably put the power and the MVN and everything into just the company name, and then just have an agreement with the household as to how we share that and split that.
So how your question about the rent, would it be similar to Department of Housing rent?
Yes.
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 25% of your...
Yeah. It's about $9,266 a year currently, something like that.
So subsidised.
Yeah. Yeah.
And with that, do they not eligible for rental assistance from Centrelink?
No, I think they get all of those. There's 3 levels. Whatever they currently get comes with them. That doesn't get touched at all. Yeah. So the extra money coming through the SDA is really the government.
You don't get rent assistance. No.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So no, this would be the same as if you're going into the mainstream housing market. So that's what you'd be paying. But the higher amount of money coming out of the SDA plan to the property owner is really acknowledgement by the government, because otherwise the government would have to be buying all this housing and owning this housing. And as we know, it's not really, for a lot of states in Australia, the Department of Housing is not building the volume of housing it used to, because it becomes almost a negative asset class for them, because they can't repurpose it. And yeah, so.
And so then a participant moves out.
Yes.
Because I guess leading up to this, you're working with an identified client and designing for their needs and things like that. But then essentially, like years down the track, you've got the property established, someone moves out, there's like a room vacancy. For someone else to move in, they
they'd go the same process that the very first person had to go through to get into that house. So that's why I'm saying from a community point of view, and that's where we work quite well in Cairns, is sharing information. So first up with Lily at community at Mercy Care, we're trying to build a database now to get everybody registered, de-identified, but actually working out where are they, what do they need, where are they on their journey with getting their SDA. It would help work out where the capacity is for support with OTs. But then, as we move on, obviously it'd be great to have a register of, there'll be a website, whatever, that we would work on as saying there's a vacancy coming up, just like it does at the moment, where you're trying to get a SIL or something, you're ringing Kutharinga or Endeavour and saying, has anyone got a spare room? Or Kelly's saying, I've got to get people out of the hospital, is there any availability? And we're not going to go crazy about how many houses we build. We will build to the market, and when we think that we've built enough to the market to sustain the market, then hopefully there's a natural attrition that comes through as to people moving into Cairns, leaving, change of circumstance, yeah. But yeah, I mean, going back to what Kat's saying, that eligibility criteria is so stringent and so strict and so hardly tested that there'll be very much a limit to the number of people. So therefore there will be a limit to the number of houses, because the government won't have a bucket load of money to keep just pouring into this sector. I mean, it's an enormous investment they've made, which is great, but it will get to the point where they go, well, that's as much as we can.
There's new participants coming into the scheme.
Yeah, exactly, and that changes circumstance and people.
But it is only a small market therefore for that need.
But it's such a big change from the last 50 years, which is you just go to a group home or an institution, or you just get stuck at home. What this is doing is giving people such an incredible opportunity of living independently.
It's
Yeah.
running that conversation, keeping that conversation going, and talking to the NDIS and talking about people about it. It's
So
so important.
I guess the benefit of the previous system, notwithstanding, is that there was a sense of information flow that was centralised, which is when you go to a private market, socialist for me, you have a lot of other things to contend with when you're trying to look at identifying the client group, the matching, and also dealing with individual private businesses in terms of who they have for their clients, and making sure as a government entity that people have full access to choose who they want to have as their support coordinators or service provider, all those sorts of things. So it does add extra complexity when we've got people that we know predominantly at that very high level, and not necessarily just all spinal injury. They'll come from spinal injury unit in PA, but we have high level strokes that don't get down there, ABI, which is functionally have mobility issues that are very heavy. So hypoxic brain injuries, all of our ABIs that are not necessarily mobilising, and high level behavioural that we will see that are stuck in that acute sector, because the capacity for where they're going to is quite limited. So we're a pipeline that Sarah's identified, but we're also ensuring that a website to be able to identify that this is likely to be where they're going when they first get their first plan. And start to
I mean, to save time and to streamline, that's why we're trying to have the conversations now. So the more information that's shared around within the community, people go, okay, I know where to go now, or I didn't know that was an opportunity, or I didn't know.
It helps us to know if that support coordinator knows what the other options are. Then we know that they'll be able to try to maximise for their client.
But also, like Kelly, when we had our last meeting, you identified a client that at the moment the sister was taking the whole burden on taking her brother out, and then she was going to go through the whole process of trying to get the home modification done to her home, which is her home. At the end of the day, if something happens to him, she's then got this house, which is probably not to the purpose of what she wants at the end of the day. So she didn't realise there's an opportunity to talk about, well, maybe there's another pathway for accommodation that would be more suitable.
And there's so many sitting in cells that aren't aware of SDA, families and rest homes, and I'm not affiliated with any provider, so I can say this, and a lot of the time they don't tell them because there is profit for them in maintaining that cell. So we need to have those conversations. Yeah.
And we're mindful that this transition, the hospital isn't going to get you straight into an SDA.
No.
But that conversation in terms of those opportunities need to be started so that there's an MTA and then a SIL potentially, you know,
Yeah.
and you maximising SDAs as well, because we're trying to move people out of hospital quicker,
Mm.
and identifying public housing if we've got a date so that we can get an MTA because they've got timelines.
And then you're working with a public trustee for a lot of clients in the hospital, and that has all sorts of red tape that's got to go through before a support coordinator can be identified or approached. Families have had catastrophic accidents and have no idea what the NDIS is all about anyway, so where do you start the conversation there?
Plus all of the hidden. So people we never see in the hospital until the ageing parents come into hospital and they're the main carers, having some supports, and then it's like, oh, okay, yeah,
That's
there's
a big thing.
yeah.
And
That's a big area out there.
yeah, my first option was SDA. I didn't go any lower. I'm just like, righto, let's get SDA. And that was 2 years ago, and no one was talking about it back then. Absolutely no one. So,
But it's interesting because I've seen lots of conversation around it, but people not knowing what they're talking about.
yeah.
Talking about
Were we like that today?
SDA is looking like this, and I'm like, well, that's not going to work. You're not going to be eligible. Yes, we are. We've spoken to someone and they told no.
False
I know
hope.
you're
That's
right.
why it's so
No.
important to share that, because it's 30 hours out of their plan. It's
Yep.
a couple of $1,000s that's been, you know, that may...
People hear things and then they run with it, or someone might give them misinformation.
Yeah.
And someone on Facebook told me I could get SDA.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, everybody's eligible for SDA, and it's
No.
heartbreaking when you speak to people and say, no, you're not.
True.
You're not going to meet that need.
Get a consultant involved, and then, yeah.
So it's, making sure that we get the right information.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
if you don't know, pass it on to somebody who has that expertise. Broker some dollars for someone.
True.
Pass it on to the right person.
True.
You know, if you don't know, ask or
Share.
Yeah.
Hi, Anneke.
I have a lot of those conversations, don't worry.
Yeah, it's important. It's really
Yeah.
So before we wrap, is there any other key questions, burning questions? Otherwise, you've got my phone number, email. More than happy to meet one-on-one and get conversations going. We're open to any ideas. We're quite expansive in our thinking. We still have a little group going with Kelly and Yvette and Lily at the moment. We're building this Google Live document that Lily's taken charge of. So when that goes, we'll send that out. We'll share this package to you all tomorrow. That's got the linkages to all these documents we've talked about. And James just wants to say a few words.
Well, just thank you for coming, and I hope in some way that's given you some knowledge. We're still learning, Ken's is still learning, and you know, we're trying our best to keep abreast of this sort of shifting sands of SDA. We'll be very excited to open Lily Street in about 3 weeks' time. It's going like a train at the moment. And you know, I know living with my fellow director is, you know, she got involved with this a year ago.
I'm actually his wife, by the way, just in case you hadn't worked it out.
We got to the end of the year, and Sarah was exhausted with the emotional energy that she had to spend in this sector, and we sort of walked away from it. And then, you know, with insistence upon some people, Sarah got back into it, and we said, righto, let's jump in, let's do this. But if we're going to do it, like everything else we do, we want to do it to the best of our ability. So this is, you know, small little seminar is some way of disseminating information between us all. And you know, it's a great thing we're all doing, and I think we all should work together, because what we want to do at the end of the day is get people in proper accommodation, out of accommodation that doesn't suit them, and give people a real shot at living the way they want to live. So that's what we're about. That's what you guys are about. So let's keep working together. We can't work in silos to make this happen. We're going to work together. So let's keep sharing
Yep,
information.
we'll do it again. You know, this is the first time we've done it. And what the breakaway from this morning was there's such a big need for this robust conversation. So we're thinking we might just do a bit more of a workshop on that dialogue. Paul, you got your hand up?
Just shout out to Andrew Johnson down in Melbourne. He's pretty envious of us all sitting up here without masks on.
That's very cute.
But she's just trying to navigate the whole system at the moment as a parent. And she's been watching the show today, so thank you very much indeed. On the other computer, she's been doing an OT session on the computer with her child. So,
Okay.
Okay. The other tiny plug, I have to do it, MiHAVEN training. We have an RTO. We're very locally based. I think we're now in about 50% of all the schools in Cairns teaching. And our business is very diversified culturally. And we train in disability. And Ray, you're one of our students. So we do face-to-face mostly, but we are taking the disability training, the Cert 3, which many people will be eligible for that, funded by the government. There's a tiny contribution, about $150. And I mean, Ray, from your point of view, you said to me the other day that, tell me what you said about why.
Well, I just think for, eventually I've been a caseworker and eventually I'd like to work in coordinating. But it was good to go and do the training from the bottom basically.
Yeah.
And learn about it, and I'm looking forward to being a support carer and then a coordinator. I think it's important to have a good overall knowledge.
Yeah. Yeah, and you said to me, like, I'm really glad that I just got exposed to it from a training perspective, because it is there's a barrier to this industry. There's a fear factor about what this industry is about. And it's actually got huge opportunity career-wise. And with the impact of COVID on the tourism and hospitality industry up here, there are a lot of people that are going to be really suited to work in this space. It's got a huge burnout rate, we know that. But we need more. If we grow the houses, we're going to need more SIL support, we're going to need more people qualified. And it's recognised in Australia as one of the biggest growth industries from an employability point of view. I mean, you guys as OTs are seeing that. Yeah, so just sharing that we have this, extensive training program that we can offer to anybody that's got staff or whatever that would do with a little bit more fine tuning.
Oh, good.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.